Hi, this is Van with Gather and Create, and I am going to show you how to knit a stitch. So, knitting is basically reaching down through a stitch and pulling the working yarn up through and pulling out a stitch. Okay, that's a knit stitch. So we've got the chain here. We cast on our first row of stitches here, and now we're going to start with our second row of stitches. And we are going to start skipping the first stitch in every row. So we threw our ball of yarn down to the end of the row that we're traveling to. So that's the end of our row down there. And here's the beginning of our row. If this is the beginning, then this is stitch 1. We always skip stitch number 1 in every new row. And keep in mind, every time you change directions and go back the other way, that is a new row. So every direction is a new row. All right, so I'm going to skip the first stitch, and I'm going to start in the second stitch. I'm going to reach down through and grab that working yarn and pull it up through and pull out a stitch. And there's that stitch, okay? We skip that first stitch, start in the second stitch, and that's what we're going to do from here on out in every row. We skip the first stitch, start in the second stitch. And knitting is just reaching down through and pulling that stitch up. This is a knit stitch. Reaching down through that stitch and pulling a stitch out. Just like that. And we talked about it in an earlier video, but whatever number of stitches you have in your chain, that is the number of stitches you need in each row. And I'm being careful about pulling out the same size stitches. I want all of my stitches to be as uniform as possible. I did 2-inch stitch in the chain, which was about 3 fingers, and now I'm doing about a 2.5, 2-finger stitch right there, just a little bit smaller. So that knit stitch is reaching down through and pulling the working yarn up through. That's our knit stitch. Okay, pulling that up through. And our last stitch. And we always put a stitch in the last stitch of every row. Okay, now I'm going to go back the other way, so I'm starting a brand new row. So I'm going to grab my ball of yarn and throw it down to the end of the table that I'm traveling to. And now, again, I'm going to be skipping the first stitch, starting in the second stitch. Reaching down through and pulling a stitch out. That's a knit stitch. And we just reach down through, and I just use like my finger and my thumb there, and I pull that out. And you can get a little bit of a rhythm going here. I reach down through and I kind of pinch, and then I pull it up through a little bit, and then I take my thumb and kind of flick that out. And maybe, maybe you'll get like a little rhythm going there with the amount that you kind of flick out. So I'm reaching down through and grabbing that working yarn and then flicking that out with my thumb. And you can get going pretty fast there. Get a little rhythm going there. Just make sure that you're doing your best as far as pulling out the same amount of yarn each and every time. Okay, we're down to our last stitch. So I'm going to reach down through and pull that stitch out. Okay, now I've got to go back the other way because I've completed this row and I need to start a new row. So I'm going to take my ball of yarn and throw it down to the other end of the table, the end of the table that I'm traveling to. And I'm going to skip the first stitch, start in the second stitch. And I'm just going to keep doing this until I'm about out of yarn or until I have the size blanket that I want. This is the width of our blanket here, and as we add each row, that's adding to the length of the blanket. But this is the knit stitch, reaching down through that stitch and pulling the working yarn up, pulling that next stitch out.